reconnaissance drones that were guiding an incoming strike. This wasn't just a routine intercept, it was a full-scale attempt to blind Ukraine's eyes in the sky, threatening to sever the critical link between drones and fighter jets. In seconds, the calm would shatter, and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare. The Russian strike did not stop with the opening volley. A mixed formation of Su-35 flankers and MiG-31 foxhounds pushed into the battle space. Flying at altitudes above 40,000 feet and closing at speeds over Mach 2, their purpose was clear: seize the skies and choke off Ukraine's ability to see and respond. The MiG-31 second, armed with long-range R-37 missiles, locked their radars onto Ukrainian air corridors, while the Su-35 second swept low to hunt for anything that dared linger in the kill zone. Within minutes, several Ukrainian drones went down in bursts of fire and twisted wreckage, their feeds blinking to static. On the ground, command posts felt the shock immediately. Critical reconnaissance eyes were gone, leaving gaps in situational awareness just as the larger operation was getting underway. The Ukrainian formation faltered, forced to adapt in real time without the steady flow of drone intelligence that normally guided every strike and maneuver. The tension rose to a knife's edge. Everyone understood the stakes. Without the drones feeding precise targeting data, Ukraine's planned air assault risked collapsing before it even began. For a brief moment, Russia's gamble seemed to be working. The battlefield was tilting, the skies heavy with the roar of afterburners, and the outcome of the night's fight hung in the balance. The Russian ambush had thrown Ukraine's air campaign into sudden jeopardy. With drones dropping from the sky and fighter jets pressing in, it seemed as if Moscow had successfully seized the initiative. But the Ukrainians had planned for exactly this moment. From concealed launch points well behind the front line, operators unleashed waves of strike drones, a mix of modified Lancet kamikaze drones, captured and repurposed, and the battle-tested Bayraktar TB2 second that had become symbols of Ukrainian resilience. The TB2 second climbed high above 15,000 feet, their long wings cutting silently through the night. Each drone streamed real-time video back to ground control, hunting for the one weakness every complex air defense system has: the radars and comms vehicles that tie it all together. Within minutes, sensors picked up the signatures of Russian S-400 radar trucks and a forward-deployed command post tucked into a patch of woodland. The order was immediate strike. The Lancet-modified drones dove in first, their warheads primed for direct impact. One streaked low over treetops before slamming into the radar array of an S-400 fire control vehicle, detonating with a flash that lit the dark horizon. Seconds later, another slammed into a forward communications vehicle, scattering its operators and leaving antennas twisted in flames. From altitude, a TB2 captured the fireballs as proof. Two critical nodes of Russia's air defense net were gone. The effect was dramatic and nearly instantaneous. In less than 5 minutes, the once imposing iron shield that Russia relied on to protect its fighter squadrons was full of holes. Radar screens went blank. Command circuits fell silent, and coordination among the Su-35 second and MiG-31 second began to unravel. Pilots who, seconds before, had enjoyed total situational dominance suddenly found themselves blind, forced to fly defensive patterns without reliable guidance. For Ukraine, the shift was electric. What had looked like the beginning of a failed air campaign was now something else entirely: an opening. With Russia's eyes gouged out and its communications crippled, the path for counterattack was finally clearing. The drones had not only survived the storm, they had turned it back against the enemy. The initiative was about to change hands. The destruction of the S-400 radar and forward comms post sent shockwaves through the Russian formation. Pilots who moments earlier had flown with confidence now found themselves blind, their cockpits filled with silence where radar prompts once guided every move. That was the opening Ukraine had been waiting for. Out of the haze, a pair of Ukrainian fighters, one MiG-29 Pilgrim and one Su-27 flanker, roared forward, throttles pushed to the stops, afterburners streaking blue fire across the night sky. The MiG-29, a nimble dogfighter upgraded with Western avionics, carried a deadly surprise, AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles provided by the United States. Flying just under 30,000 feet, The fulcrum locked onto the heat signature of an approaching Su-35 at nearly 40 miles out. The pilot's voice was calm over the comms. Fox 3. With a hiss and a burst of light, the AMRAAM detached and streaked ahead at supersonic speed, guiding itself on the Russian jet. The Su-35 pilot tried to break lock, banking hard and deploying countermeasures, but without the S-400 radar net feeding him real-time situational data, his maneuvers were a guess in the dark. The AMRAAM stayed true. In a blinding flash visible for dozens of miles, the missile slammed into the Su-35's fuselage, igniting its fuel stores. A fireball erupted at 20,000 feet, raining molten debris and jagged wreckage across the battlefield below. For a moment, the explosion seemed to hang in the sky, a blazing orb marking a turning point in the fight. Russian fighters that had been pressing forward now broke formation, some scattering, others pulling high into defensive climbs. The psychological impact was immediate. The Su-35 was supposed to be Russia's crown jewel, the hunter, not the hunted. Watching one burst into a flaming wreck shifted the balance not only of the battle, but of morale itself. Meanwhile, the Su-27 flanker pressed deeper, weaving through the confusion and forcing Russian MiGs into defensive maneuvers. Its role was not to score kills, but to sow chaos, pushing Russian pilots into reactive moves while the MiG-29's AMRAAMs picked them apart at range. What had begun as a carefully scripted Russian air ambush was now disintegrating into a scramble for survival. Ukraine had turned the tables. In less than 10 minutes, the skies that had seemed to belong to Moscow were contested once again. The combination of drones carving open the shield and fighters striking through the breach was working exactly as planned. And with one Russian Su-35 now a burning memory against the dark clouds, the message was unmistakable. Ukraine was not done fighting for control of the night sky. The fiery death of the Su-35 rattled Russia's formation, but Moscow was not about to concede the skies so easily. Even as wreckage still fell toward the fields below, the Russian command shifted to a different playbook. Out from the rear of the formation came aircraft outfitted with Kibani electronic warfare pods. Their mission, not to kill directly, but to twist the invisible fabric of the electromagnetic spectrum. Almost instantly, the air grew thick with interference. Ukrainian pilots reported their radars fuzzing with static, targeting screens flickering in and out. More troubling still, the swarm of Ukrainian drones that had paved the way for the strike began to lose their link signals. Bayraktars and Lancet-modified UAVs that had just moments ago flown with precision now drifted off course, their feeds freezing or blinking to black. Some fell from the sky like steel carcasses, crashing into the dark earth below with dull explosions. Adding to the chaos, Russia deployed decoy drones, cheap, fast-moving targets designed to confuse Ukrainian sensors. They appeared suddenly on radar, multiplying into phantom threats. To a Ukrainian pilot scanning a crowded scope, it was nearly impossible to tell which blips were real fighters and which were electronic ghosts. The skies, briefly tilted toward Ukraine, seemed to be swinging back toward Moscow's control. For ground commanders watching the feeds vanish, the tension was suffocating. The carefully coordinated assault that had struck so decisively only minutes before was fraying under the weight of electronic disruption. Without their drones' eyes and their radar's clarity, Ukrainian pilots risked flying blind into an ambush. For the first time since the battle began, it felt as though Russia had clawed its way back to parity. But beneath the confusion, Ukraine had not lost its nerve. The breakdown of drone feeds and radar clarity was serious, yes, but it was not unexpected. Hidden in reserve, another layer of the Ukrainian battle plan waited, ready to spring. What seemed like the unraveling of the song was in fact the setup for something sharp and more decisive. The Russians believed they had regained momentum. In truth, they had walked straight into the buildup of the next strike. The calm before the storm was returning, and the storm was about to break. Russia's electronic counterstrike had rattled Ukraine's formation, scattering drones and filling radar screens with ghosts. For a moment, it looked as though Moscow had seized back control of the battlefield. But what seemed like disarray wasn't from the trigger of Ukraine's next move, a reserve plan designed for this very contingency. The counter to Russia's electronic fog would not be hesitation, but escalation. The order went out. Initiate the three-layer strike. Layer 1. The drones. From hidden launch sites miles behind the front, waves of kamikaze UAVs surged forward, their small signatures difficult for disrupted Russian radars to track. They came in low, skimming treetops and ridgelines before diving into exposed assets, fuel trucks, parked aircraft, and radar trailers on the edge of a Russian forward airfield. The first explosions rolled across the landscape like drumbeats, tearing holes in the defenses and clearing the path for the strike that followed. Layer 2. The MiG-29 second. Flying high above 25,000 feet, the fulcrums locked onto Russian fighters scrambling to intercept. Armed again with U.S.-supplied AIM-120 AMRAAMs, they fired from distance, forcing Su-35 second and MiG-31 second onto the defensive. Each missile streaked outward at over Mach 4, pushing the Russian aircraft to break formation and scatter. In the space of minutes, what had been an organized air screen dissolved into evasive maneuvers. Layer 3. The Su-27 second. With the outer defenses collapsing, a pair of flankers dove into the gap, throttles wide open, descending fast on the Russian forward airfield. At less than 10,000 feet, they released precision-guided JDAMs, American-made smart bombs riding GPS signals to their targets. The bombs struck the runway, fuel depots, and hardened shelters in a series of thunderclaps. Flames leapt hundreds of feet into the air, and a plume of black smoke began to claw at the night sky. The effect was devastating. The runway split open. Fuel stores erupted into a rolling inferno, and secondary blasts from ammunition stockpiles sent shock waves echoing for miles. Russia's forward airfield, the very base meant to anchor its assault, was now a burning crater. What had begun as a desperate Ukrainian defense against superior Russian fighters had turned into something far greater, a coordinated strike that shattered not just aircraft, but the illusion of Russian dominance in the skies. The storm had broken, and its fire was all Ukrainian. The inferno at the forward airfield should have ended the fight, but Moscow, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, threw in its last card. From a staging zone barely 15 miles away, a flight of Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopters lifted off, their rotors thundering through the smoke-filled night. Armed with anti-tank missiles and heavy rockets, they swept low, angling toward Ukrainian ground positions in a bid to blunt the momentum of the air assault. But Ukraine was ready. Hidden in the shadows of tree lines and ridge lines, operators had been waiting with Switchblade 600 loitering munitions, small, lethal drones designed to hunt helicopters exactly like these. As the Ka-52 second approached within 8 miles, the Switchblades were launched. Silent and fast, they locked onto the heat signatures of the Russian gunships and dove. The first impact ripped through the lead helicopter's rotor assembly, sending it spiraling into the fields below. Seconds later, another slammed into the formation, triggering a chain reaction of explosions. Fuel ignited midair, and for a heartbeat, the entire sky lit up. A cascade of fireballs streaking down like falling stars. In less than 3 minutes, the counterattack was over. What Russia had hoped would be a show of resilience had instead become a final disaster. The last act of the night sky battle belonged firmly to Ukraine. The fiery collapse of Russia's Ka-52 counterattack marked the final turning point. By dawn, Ukraine not only held the skies, but had left the Russian forward airfield in ruins, and sent multiple enemy aircraft spiraling to their deaths. What began as a desperate defense had ended in decisive victory. Ukraine had not just survived, it had dominated. Strategically, the consequences were severe. With its radar nodes destroyed, its airfield gutted, and its prized fighters and gunships lost, Russia was forced to pull its squadrons back deep into its own territory. The long-range threat that once loomed over the front lines was suddenly muted, its edge dulled. For the Kremlin, this wasn't merely a tactical setback, it was a blow to the image of air superiority Moscow had clung to since the first days of the war. But the victory raised larger questions. If even a fortified forward base could be dismantled by a layered mix of drones and fighters, what Russian airfield could be called safe? And how would Moscow strike back, knowing its opponents could carve open the skies with creativity and precision? Beyond the tactics, A message endured. Modern war is not simply brute firepower, but innovation, coordination, and humanity. Amid the wreckage, Ukrainian troops were